She had climbed Kilimanjaro. She had cycled across an entire country alone. She had spent more nights in the backcountry than most people spend indoors. She was 70 years old, and she was not someone who made mistakes. On the morning of August 9th, 2006, she missed her mandatory weather check-in for the first time in her career. A supervisor called the tower. The line disconnected mid-ring. When a colleague arrived at the Athabasca fire lookout to check on her, the water on the stovetop was still warm. She was gone. Her survival gear was untouched. Her food was still cooking. Her gold watch, her duvet, and 2 pillows were missing. Nothing else. No one has ever explained that. Athabasca Fire Lookout, Hinton, Alberta, elevation 4,000 feet above the Tonquin Valley. August 2006. Fire season. The kind of summer where the whole Northwest Corridor stays dry for weeks at a time, and the smoke sits in the valley like it has nowhere else to go. 1 watcher, 1 tower, 67 steps from the cabin floor to the observation deck. This is what she recorded in her log the morning before she vanished. And this is what she did not. The morning of August 9th started the same way every morning started up there. I woke before the alarm, made coffee, stood at the east window and watched the Tonquin Valley pull itself out of the dark, fog sitting low in the trees, no wind yet, just that particular quiet you only get at altitude, where even the birds seem to hold off a little longer than they should. I had been at the Athabasca Tower for going on 3 seasons, 67 steps from the cabin floor to the observation deck. I had counted them so many times they felt like my own heartbeat. The job was simple: watch, record, report. Every morning at 7:45 I called in the weather, wind speed, visibility, precipitation. A 2-minute check in that the province used to track fire conditions across the whole Northwest Corridor. That morning I got the kettle on, oatmeal on the burner, set my gold watch on the table so I would not forget to call in on time. I remember looking at it, 7:18. The valley below was still. I had done this job long enough to know what normal looked like, and that morning felt normal, not a single thing out of place. The kind of morning where you almost feel guilty for how peaceful it is when you know what the job is actually for, what it is you are watching for. I stepped out onto the lower deck to check the anemometer. The fog had come up the ridge while I was inside. It was closer than it should have been that fast. Not unusual exactly. But I stood there for a moment longer than I planned to. The tree line below was just a wall of shapes. I went back inside. The water was still warm. The oatmeal was still going. My watch was still on the table. I picked up the radio handset. The line did not connect the way it usually did. I want to be clear about something. I'm not someone who panics. I have climbed Kilimanjaro. I have cycled across this country alone, in weather that would make most people turn around before they even started. I have spent more nights alone in the backcountry than I could count, and not once did I mistake a sound for something it was not. Not once did I let the isolation get inside my head. So when I say the static on that handset felt wrong, I mean something specific by that. Not the normal dead air static you get on a bad morning, something else. Something with a texture to it almost, like it was coming from closer than the other end of the line. I set the handset back in the cradle, tried again, nothing. I checked the time, 7:22. I had 23 minutes before the mandatory check-in window closed. Equipment failures happened. I was not concerned yet. I turned the burner down on the oatmeal and walked the perimeter of the observation deck to see if anything looked different from up there. The fog had moved again. It was against the base of the tower now. I could not see the ground. The tree line on the north side had gone completely gray, like someone had just erased it. I stood at the railing and looked down, and there was nothing below me but white. I'm not sure how long I stood there. When I went back inside, I noticed the temperature had dropped, not by much, just enough that I pulled my sleeves down. I tried the radio a 3rd time. The static was still there. But this time underneath it, I thought I heard something. Not words, not a voice, just a rhythm. Something steady and low, repeating at irregular intervals. I told myself it was interference, weather, line noise. I put the handset down and went to finish my oatmeal. I did not pick up my watch from the table. I do not know why I left it there. The call came in at 8:14. I know the exact time because I had just looked at the clock on the wall, the one above the radio station, when the line finally connected. Not from my end, from theirs. The province had called me. It was my supervisor, Dave. I had worked with him for 2 seasons, and he was not a man who wasted words. He asked me why I had missed the 7:45 check-in. I told him about the static, the failed connections. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he was going to send someone up to look at the equipment. I told him that was not necessary. He said someone was already on their way. That was when I understood the call was not really about the equipment. I sat with that for a minute after we hung up. The cabin felt smaller than it usually did. I am not sure why. Nothing had changed. Same 4 walls, same low ceiling, same view out the east window, which by then had cleared a little, the fog pulling back from the glass. I went to the window and looked out. The fog was still thick below the ridge, but right at the tree line, maybe 200 feet down the access road, I could see where the gravel ended and the forest started. I stood there for a while. I told myself I was just checking visibility. That is part of the job. You watch. You note what you see, you write it down. I did not write it down. I went back to the radio and checked the frequency. Everything read normal. I keyed the handset twice just to test it. Clean signal both times. Whatever had been wrong that morning was gone now. I should have felt better. I walked to the bedroom to make the bed before the colleague arrived. The duvet was already folded back. Both pillows were where they always were. I stood in the doorway. I could not remember folding the duvet back. My colleague arrived at 10:30. I heard the truck before I saw it, the engine cutting out at the base of the tower, the door closing, then footsteps on the metal stairs, 67 of them. I had counted them so many times I could track exactly where someone was just by listening. She knocked twice and came in. I had worked with her the previous season. She was practical and quiet and did not make a habit of asking questions she did not need answers to. She looked around the cabin the way you look at a room when you are checking it without wanting to appear like you are checking it. She asked how I was doing. I told her fine. Equipment issue this morning, but it had resolved itself. She nodded and looked at the radio console, asked if she could take a look. I told her to go ahead. While she worked, I stood at the east window. The fog had pulled back almost completely by then. I could see down into the valley, the tree line clear and dark against the gray sky. Everything exactly where it should be. I watched the access road. I'm not sure what I was expecting to see. She called me over after a few minutes, said the console looked fine, said she could not find anything that would explain a failed connection. She had this way of saying things that made you feel like the conversation was not quite finished, like there was another sentence she was deciding whether to add. She did not add it. I made coffee. We sat across from each other at the table. She looked at the empty space where my watch usually sat. She did not ask about it. I realized I still had not picked it up. I looked over at the table. The watch was gone. She stayed until 2 in the afternoon. Before she left, she asked me quietly if I wanted her to radio ahead, let someone know she had been up. I told her that was not necessary. She nodded the way people nod when they are going to do something anyway. I watched the truck back down the access road from the observation deck. It disappeared into the tree line and the sound of the engine faded, and then there was nothing, just the valley. Just the wind picking up now along the ridge, moving through the spruce in long, slow passes. I went inside and stood in the middle of the cabin. The watch was not on the table. I checked the bedroom, both nightstands, the shelf above the radio console. I got on my knees and looked under the bed, under the table. I checked my own wrists twice, which I already knew was pointless. It was not anywhere. I sat down at the table and tried to think through the morning in order, waking up, the kettle, setting the watch down at 7:18, the radio, the fog, Dave's call, my colleague arriving, 2 mugs of coffee. At no point in that sequence did I move the watch. At no point did anyone else have reason to touch it. I went to the bedroom one more time. The duvet was still folded back the way I had found it that morning. Both pillows in place. I stood in the doorway and looked at the bed for a long time. Then I looked at the pillows more carefully. There were 2 of them. There had always been 2 of them, but the indentations in both were fresh. The kind you get after a full night of sleep. Not from sitting, not from leaning, the kind that take hours. I had not slept in that bed the night before. I had fallen asleep on the couch. I did not call it in. I am not sure why. They never found her. Weeks of searching, sent dogs, underwater teams, hundreds of volunteers across some of the most unforgiving terrain in northern Alberta. Nothing. The watch was never recovered. The duvet was never recovered. No explanation was ever given for the pillows. If you want another case that has no clean ending, no resolution, and no answer that makes sense, the next video is already waiting.